Hi, y'all. Thank you all for coming. My name is Victoria. For those who I haven't met yet, I use she, her pronouns, and this is my dissertation defense. I will be attempting to fit 2 years of research and 155 pages of information into a 20 or so minute presentation. So if you have questions, I would love to hear them, but please stock them away in your brain or write them down, and I will love to answer them at the end. My dissertation is titled Addressing Anti-Black Racism for a Limited Time Only, Black Student Demands and Institutional Policy at the University of Maryland. I'll start with a brief introduction of the study. We'll go over the research questions, the methods, and then we'll spend the bulk of our time discussing the findings, offering my implications, recommendations, and conclusions. This presentation will be, again, about 20 minutes, and then we will have time for questions at the end. So I began my PhD program at the University of Maryland in the fall of 2020, just as the university was rolling out things like diversity statements and strategic plans and commitments to anti-racism. And this was similar to the statements being made at many universities across the country, particularly as the Black Lives Matter movement swept across the globe. In this letter on your screen, or at least just the title, from the University of Maryland President Dr. Pines, the title is Partnering to End Anti-Black Racism. And this was sent out to all UMD faculty, staff, and students in November of 2020. So just a couple of months into my doctorate program. As I read through this letter in the context of Black Lives Matter and the feelings I was feeling at that time, this letter being authored by the first Black UMD president and describing the university's commitment to fighting anti-Black racism, I felt hopeful and I felt proud to be a student at the University of Maryland. President Pine's letter mentioned a number of critical issues located by Black students and provided links to external sources to provide more information. This link would bring you to a dashboard on the University of Maryland website, which was used to track the university's progress on meeting what they called critical issues defined by Black student leaders. But these Black student leaders actually called this list Black student demands, and there's 25 of them. So I will reference them as Black student demands, even if you see on screen they're titled critical issues. Here we can see more information on this dashboard tracking the demands. We can see promises that the university made to maintain ongoing efforts toward meeting these 25 demands, to update the dashboard with a timeline, and to work with Black students on an ongoing basis to make sure that the process of meeting these demands is iterative and a top priority for university administration. Here we can see the very top of the dashboard where it shows the different action items or the action progresses. So if we scroll through the dashboard, it looks pretty promising. There are 25 demands, and out of that 25, 21 are listed as completed or sustained commitments, and just 4 are still in progress. Although, over time, I would go back to revisit the dashboard every few months, every couple years. And as I looked closer, especially as I started to think about what I wanted to do for my dissertation, I noticed that many of these demands hadn't been touched in years, which caused that feeling of hope and pride to turn to concern and frustration. And I started to wonder if other Black students or if other people who work with Black students at the University of Maryland, like I do, had similar perceptions of UMD's so-called commitment to Black student demands. So going into the research question, this dissertation draws a direct line between the list of 25 Black student demands made at UMD in 2020 and the university's various responses to these demands through policy, practice, and communication. Black students' perceptions of the university's response to this demand after 5 years. To frame this inquiry, I employ these 2 research questions. The first one being, how do Black University of Maryland students and the faculty and staff who support them perceive the impact of UMD's policies, practices, and messaging created in response to these Black student demands? The second research question is, how can the University of Maryland create and sustain a campus culture that centers Black student need as a norm rather than primarily during times of racial unrest? My study seeks to fill gaps in college student activism literature and institutional policy scholarship by marrying critical theory with organizational theory and weaving narrative analysis and document analysis through case study, and doing so during a pivotal moment in the socio-political landscape, which it seems we cannot escape in recent years. While similar demands made to other universities have been researched before, whether or not progress is actually occurring and who says is somewhat unknown and yet to be documented fully in the literature. Further, where most research related to student demands and institutional responses focuses on students generally, or students of color slightly more specifically, this study focuses explicitly on Black students and Black student demands made at one university, the University of Maryland. This paper is guided primarily by two theories that make up my theoretical framework, the first being Fraser's 2009 Three Justice Dimensions and Black critical theory, or Black crit. Fraser's model is an organizational theory that combines politics of cultural differences like race, class, and gender to form nuanced understandings of complex social problems. In order for justice to be truly present, according to Fraser, there has to be an equitable distribution of resources, cultural recognition, and political representation, or what Fraser calls the 3 R's of redistribution, recognition, and representation. Black crit, or Black critical theory, as described by Dumas and Ross, exists within a family of critical race theory. Black crit uses 3 framing ideas that offer that anti-Blackness has been shaping the United States since before the United States was called the United States, that Blackness exists in tension with a neoliberal multicultural imagination by which racism would simply go away if we just stopped talking about it, and to truly eradicate anti-Black racism would necessitate disorder or chaos necessary to upend centuries of white supremacy and anti-Black racism. With the help of this theoretical framework, I designed and carried out my study. Using these methods, I did a qualitative case study using semi-structured focus groups of Black students as well as faculty and staff who work directly with Black students. I engaged historical and document analysis, including articles, social media posts, letters, emails, and videos related to the Black student demands and the university's response. This study was time-bound, and data collection took place between late 2024 and early 2025. But to give you an idea of what that time and place was feeling like for students, now I have to talk to you a bit about what led up to the Black student demands over the past 5 to 7 years. The Black student demands began to come together around 2019 and 2020, and they were inspired by several simultaneous factors, like Black Lives Matter, which began around 2013, 2014, but did have a resurgence in 2020, anti-DEI and anti-CRT rhetoric, transgender bans, anti-immigrant policies, the ongoing genocide of Palestinians by Israeli forces, multiple contentious national elections. And on UMD's campus specifically, there were 2 deaths of Black students on campus only a year apart. On May 20th, 2017, 22-year-old Lieutenant Richard W. Collins III was visiting friends at the University of Maryland just a couple of days before he was set to graduate from Bowie State University, when a white supremacist UMD student attacked him unprovoked. When the white UMD student, who was active in white supremacist groups online, demanded that Lieutenant Collins step left if he knows what's good for him. Thank you. Tech support also delivers tissues. Lieutenant Collins stood his ground. The murderer of Lieutenant Collins stabbed him to death and left Lieutenant Collins' friends, who were not Black, unharmed. 19-year-old Jordan McNair was at football practice for the UMD Terrapins on May 29th, 2018, when he began showing visible signs of extreme heat exhaustion. UMD staff, athletic staff, did not call an ambulance for over an hour, and after Jordan suffered a heat stroke induced seizure, he was placed in an ambulance with a temperature of 106 degrees. He would pass away in the hospital 15 days later. I swear I rehearsed this and I didn't cry this much. Big day. The death of Jordan McNair and the murder of Lieutenant Collins deeply impacted Black students at UMD, and their legacy helped inform the Black student demands and inspired this study. I will now take you through the study's participants. This study includes 26 participants. 15 of them are undergraduate students, 4 graduate students, and 7 UMD faculty and staff. Of the 4 graduate students, 2 are UMD undergraduate alumni. Of the 7 UMD faculty and staff, 2 are UMD undergraduate alumni as well. The rationale to include undergraduates, graduate students, and faculty and staff is to include perspectives from faculty and staff who work with multiple students and you may have been at the institution for longer than the average student would be. Students who were undergraduates at UMD while these Black student demands were being made in 2020, and students who enrolled at the university after 2020 are currently attending the university. The student participants included a variety of students from different years, majors, immigration histories, nationalities, ethnicities, sexualities, and genders. Of the 4 graduate students, 2 attended UMD for their undergrad. All students in this study are racially Black, which is inclusive of multiracial Black folks and people of the African diaspora. Some further information is provided on screen as to the backgrounds of these student participants. For the faculty and staff participants, their race and ethnicity was not part of the selection criteria like it was for the Black student participants. So participants could be of any race, though most of the people who support Black student initiatives are also themselves Black. So we see that the faculty and staff participants include a range of different departments, genders, sexualities, races, and ethnicities. Specific offices and departments are not named to protect the faculty and staff anonymity. So through these focus groups with Black students, as well as faculty and staff, 2 key themes emerged, as well as several sub-themes. The first key theme is institutional performativity and transparency, and the second is active cultural shift. First, we'll review the first key theme and the first sub-theme, which is student leadership and institutional momentum. The most common perception of the University of Maryland's practices and policies designed to meet Black student demands is that they are performative, which is in line with a lot of literature about university DEI initiatives or university race-conscious initiatives. Both Black student participants and university faculty and staff alike agree that the institution has communicated commitments to meeting the Black student demands, but has not followed up on their commitments, has not provided updates or data for accountability, and is merely waiting for the Black students who created the demands to graduate and get the heck out of here so the university can stop pretending to care. Angela remarks that she felt the momentum of the Black student demands back in 2020 when she was an undergraduate student, but now as a PhD candidate set to graduate this spring, she knows that most of those students have graduated and that momentum she once felt has stagnated. Malcolm is a UMD staff member and speaks to the stagnation of momentum by describing that the frequency and duration of the required work with Black students on these demands was unsustainable for the UMD administration. Malcolm described that admin decided to meet with multiple student groups of a variety of identities all at once instead of continuing the Black student-specific meetings. What the theoretical framework and literature review of this study will tell us is that this is a recipe for marginalizing Black students further by prioritizing the most common denominator when all of our issues or demands are put into one bucket. This further limits Black students' representational power. The overwhelming consensus shared by participants was that UMD would pay mere lip service to Black students who created these demands, but ultimately not make a significant impact to the status quo, and likely quietly sunset their commitment to these demands once most of the students attending when they were launched had graduated. Like clockwork, the University of Maryland has confirmed the performativity of their espoused commitments to meeting the Black student demands precisely when the Black students expected they would. The letter from President Pines that linked to an article detailing all that UMD was doing and planning to do to combat anti-Black racism has mysteriously disappeared. It's been removed. And the dashboard tracking UMD's progress on those Black student demands has also been removed. The last Black student who worked on the Black student demands directly as an undergraduate will leave this institution with her PhD this spring. The students who attended UMD as first years in 2020, when these Black student demands were being rolled out and committed to, would have graduated last year if they completed their degree in 4 years, and this year if they complete their degree in 5 years. The popularity of racial justice that was prevalent during 2020 and the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement has died down, and the current political establishment has made efforts toward racial justice not just unpopular, but uniquely challenging. However, speaking of the lip service that Black students communicated feeling the university was paying to them, participants also voiced concern that UMD's espoused commitment to the Black student demands was either intentionally lip service or possibly just also poor communication, which brings us into subtheme number 2, institutional communication. Participants described frustration that the institutional messaging around the Black student demands was devoid of timelines, devoid of implementation plans, did not include assessment, did not include links to data or outside relevant information, and very scarcely, if ever, updated the demands. So there were very little deliverables to point to whether or not progress was actually being made. In regard to the action status of each demand, Tony, a UMD staff member, was concerned that the status of sustained commitment was used as a distraction, or as she calls it, a smokescreen. As mentioned, there are 3 different action statuses for the 25 demands. Each demand is listed as completed, sustained commitment, or in progress. This bar featured at the top of the demands offers no distinction between a sustained commitment and a demand in progress. Only 5 of the 25 Black student demands were listed as completed on the UMD dashboard tracking the demands, even though this bar kind of makes it look like 21 of them are at least nearly completed. None of the completed demands offer data or assessment regarding the success of the university's resulting policy or program, and none of the 5 completed demands have been updated in any way in the past 4 years. 20 demands were listed as in progress or sustained commitment. Of the 20 demands described by UMD as in progress or sustained commitment, only 6 have been updated since 2024 and 5 in 2023. The University of Maryland has provided no update in the past 3 years for 14 of the 25 Black student demands. This dishonest and vague communication flirts with the idea of the neoliberal multicultural imagination in Black crit and positions the university as practically done meeting the Black student demands when, in reality, only 5 of 25 are listed as complete, and even the completed demands are weak. For example, demand number 9. Demand number 9 calls for the university to be held accountable to following through on these 25 demands. The University of Maryland marked this demand complete for the sheer reason that this milquetoast dashboard exists, or rather, it used to exist because it's not online anymore. Presidential executive orders, Supreme Court rulings, proposed Senate bills, and letters to universities from the Department of Education for as long as that exists have threatened universities with funding cuts and legal actions if these universities do not halt policies and programs placed arbitrarily under the umbrella of DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion. I don't say this to let the University of Maryland off the hook for supporting Black students during this time just because it's challenging. In fact, this offers the university a unique opportunity to prove that their commitment to racial justice was not just performative, was not just because it was popular in 2020, but rather they will stick by their commitments whether or not it's popular, and especially when it's challenging, when the people who are most at risk, the most vulnerable, Black students, are placed further at risk. The risk that Black students experience on campus is further illustrated by the bias incident reporting and support subtheme. The Bias Incident Support Services Office, or BIS, was named on the Black Student Demand dashboard several times. 4 of the Black Student Demands named BIS directly or have BIS listed as a response to the demand. Considering that BIS is being called to create and instruct racial bias trainings in Demand 2, respond to hate bias incidents, and offer support in Demand 4, monitor a hate bias hotline in Demand 17, for a campus of nearly 62,000 students, faculty, and staff, and as well as other employees, surely then Demand 23 will be met, because Demand 23 calls for BIS to be staffed with at least 3 more employees than they had in 2020. Sadly, Demand number 20 has not been met. Though that demand calls for 3 more employees than they had in 2020, there are currently a grand total of 2 staff members on the Bias Incident Support Services team. The drastic understaffing of BIS directly and disproportionately harms Black students, as Black students at UMD are consistently reporting higher numbers of bias incidences and hate crimes. However, many Black students shared that they actually underreport the amount of hate bias incidences they experience because they don't always know where to go for support, and they don't have faith that the university will take their report seriously and advocate for them. This lack of power and agency can leave Black students feeling disempowered and numb to the anti-Blackness they experience. This creates an environment where anti-Blackness becomes seen as a norm and thus goes unchallenged. In other words, according to Black Grit, this anti-Blackness becomes endemic. One of the tools BIS is called to provide our mandatory racial bias trainings, which brings us to our next sub-theme of quote-unquote mandatory racial bias trainings. As a response to Black Student Demand number 2, calling for mandatory racial bias training, UMD offered an onboarding program called Terrapin Strong. If you are not familiar with the mascot to the University of Maryland, we are the Maryland Terrapins. As far as I understand, a terrapin is like a turtle of some kind. For new students, Terrapin Strong is designed as an onboarding program, as well as for new faculty and staff and other employees. It is meant to incorporate racial bias-related content, as well as in student courses, as is referenced in the solutions to this demand. The university's response to demand number 2 was frequently critiqued by participants as performative and box checking. Specifically, University of Maryland's anti-bias onboarding program, Terrapin Strong, none of the student participants could remember anything they learned from the Terrapin Strong modules. Sade offers that she might not remember because she's a senior now and she only had to take Terrapin Strong once, and that was 4 years ago. But Serena, a sophomore, took Terrapin Strong just last year, and all she remembers was that once she got it over with, she would get a free ice cream. Even Patrice, who transferred to the University of Maryland this semester, so took Terrapin Strong only a few weeks ago, says she can't remember anything specifically. I was not prompted to take Terrapin Strong, perhaps because I started at UMD in 2020 and Terrapin Strong launched mandatory modules the following year. But to see what all the hype was about, or the lack thereof, I took Terrapin Strong during my data collection process. It is a series of 5 modules with videos, text information, and quizzes. The only buttons that needed to be pressed to continue the quiz at the end of the module were the next buttons. The videos don't need to be watched, drop-down lists don't need to be dropped down, and external links don't need to be explored. A participant need only scroll to the bottom of the page and click Next to proceed with the quizzes at the end of each module. The questions at the end of each module are mostly extended response questions to which typing simply one word test is an acceptable answer. There are only 2 questions across all 5 modules where a wrong answer is even possible. While there is valuable information within the modules, none of it has to be engaged with to complete the module. It took me 2 minutes and 7 seconds to complete the Terrapin Strong module by engaging with only what was required to advance to the next step. My certificate of completion was emailed to me immediately, along with the promise of a free scoop of ice cream from the campus center. It will likely take me longer to finish my scoop of butter pecan ice cream than it took me to finish the modules themselves. Faculty and staff also reported that racial bias trainings were not mandatory for their experience at UMD. Tony, a member of UMD's staff, said that she had attended the trainings because she is personally interested, but if she were a person who wanted to avoid these trainings, she could easily do that. Similarly, most students reported never having a Black professor for one of their core classes required by their major. The only students who had more than one Black professor in their core classes were both PhD students in the College of Education. The language of active cultural shift for theme number 2 was chosen to avoid the term proactive cultural shift, as that would not apply to an institution that has already been repeatedly made aware of the anti-Blackness present on their campus. Black Student Demand 2 calls for mandatory bias training, including a history of racial bias, impacts of racial trauma, and critical examinations of how racism impacts one's life and the lives of others. These courses on screen were named by Black students as being helpful toward meeting these goals. None of these courses are required by any major program, and all are considered electives, with the exception of courses within the anti-Black racism minor, which can either be an elective or a course needed to fulfill the minor. Students reported similar reasons for enjoying these courses. For example, they said that they enjoyed in-person discussion, personal storytelling and counter-narrative, interdisciplinary material, learning from instructors of color, and being offered real-world examples based on current events. Another campus feature that Black students found helpful to them were Black student organizations. Three Black student demands named Black student organizations or physical spaces for Black students to meet on campus as important to Black students. Black students in 2025 continue to demonstrate the desire for Black student groups, just like they did in 2020. The Black student organizations mentioned by participants are featured on screen. Simone, a master's student who also completed her undergraduate at the University of Maryland, spoke to the comfort of Black student groups where she knows her people will be. Alice, a UMD staff member who is also a UMD undergraduate alumna, reiterated the importance of Black-centered spaces on predominantly white or predominantly non-Black campuses, saying that they offer an environment that especially highlights their identities and doesn't make them feel like they have to perform. While Black student demands regarding Black organizations and spaces are listed as sustained commitments on the dashboard or in progress, the language provided in the university's update does seem deceptive. For example, this update, shared last year, cites a space for historically Black fraternities and sororities, as well as multicultural fraternities and sororities, without mentioning that this space lumps together all fraternities and sororities that are not historically white and places them smack dab in the middle of the one place on campus where multiple Black student participants in this study said they'd feel wary to go to, Fraternity Row. Further, 5 cultural centers are mentioned for Black students with intersectional identities, which is vague. What it doesn't mention is that these 5 cultural centers are specifically for Latina, Native American, multiracial, and APIDA students, or Asian Pacific Islander Desi American, which does not center Black students at all. Blackness is centered in Black Student Demand number 1, which calls for an increase in the number of Black faculty and staff. Mark, a UMD staff member, described that representation for Black staff has increased over the past few years, but it was incredibly low to begin with, so the current demographics are better but far from representative. Malcolm, another member of UMD staff, cited the broken ladder as a part of the reasons why Black faculty and staff don't always stay at UMD even when they are hired. Black folks reported feeling isolated, underrepresented, and like Blackness doesn't quite fit in with the UMD campus culture. UMD's response to the call for more Black faculty and staff comes off as deceptive, again, because it only offers surface-level, nondescript information. The Faculty Advancement at Maryland for Inclusive Learning and Excellence program, the Faculty Diversity Hiring Initiative, helped recruit and hire 32 faculty from underrepresented groups. Likely, that includes Black faculty, but it's not stated how many of those underrepresented groups or people of those groups are Black people. Further, the update offers that the number of Black tenure and tenure-track faculty increased 43.1% over the past 3 years, but it does not mention that statistic relevant or relative to overall faculty growth. Despite years of opportunity for progress toward the stated goals the university said they would meet to meet the Black student demands, none of the 25 Black student demands were described by participants as sufficiently completed or sufficiently updated to ensure accountability. Further, participants did not describe faith that the university would eventually follow through on their commitments to regularly check in with Black students and remain committed to seeing these demands met. Instead, participants described the university's messaging about their commitments and progress, or lack thereof, as performative, their supposed anti-racist programming as catering to white audiences, their campus racial climate as persistently chilly, and their efforts to positively impact Black students as the bare minimum. Glimpses of Fraser's three justice dimensions are scattered throughout the university's responses to these demands, but many of these responses have been understaffed, under-resourced, and ultimately abandoned. Black Grit's framing ideas tell us that UMD's failure to live up to their promises to Black students and protect them from anti-Blackness that they are aware of is another example of anti-Blackness as endemic, which runs completely contrary to the Black liberatory fantasy. One limitation of this study is sample size in regard to the number of site institutions and the number of interview participants, because this is not a regional or national study yet. It doesn't have an incredibly large sample size. However, one of the strengths is that the sample size is broad and has a wide variety of backgrounds. The sample size for a case study is recommended to be no less than 4 people, and this study has 26. Another strength is the variety of research methods like document analysis, historical analysis, and focus groups. A different limitation is that the time constraints made it so interviews had to take place within a couple of months, and so it doesn't allow for longitudinal data collection. Some implications for research and policy include future research into the cyclical relationship between Black student activism and institutional partnership, policy, and practice. If this relationship is ongoing, healthy, iterative, and trusting, then perhaps we wouldn't need to escalate to the point of demand making. This study revealed that most of the Black student leaders involved in the demands were Black women and Black queer folks or allies to queer folks. Research, policy, and practice could be conducted to locate how to best serve Black folks of multiple marginalized identities who may be advocating for multiple groups at once. Longitudinal studies would be useful to track policies, practices, and perceptions over time, particularly regarding moments of varying socio-political pressures. The recommendations portion of my dissertation is quite lengthy, and as you may be able to tell by this point in the presentation, I'm a bit of a talker. However, in the interest of time, I have summarized a few key recommendations. A persistent theme in the data was that the responsibility for working on the Black student demands fell in the hands of students who would go on to graduate and whose roles were not replaced, as well as departments of many people, but it was not exactly clear or stated who would be accountable to conduct assessment or provide updates to the dashboard. Further, as capacity was reached, admin attempted to lump in Black students with other student group meetings, ultimately resulting in sparsely held amorphous meetings that did not center Black student needs as much as they had previously. I recommend the Black student demands take on a presidential task force structure where members are named and replaced as they phase out to maintain momentum and accountability. The existing racial bias education efforts are sparse, not always mandatory, and largely ineffective. So I recommend that mandatory and reoccurring racial justice education offers proven methods like interdisciplinary content and dialogue. Lastly, I recommend that the Black student demand dashboard be updated and published again. The existing action statuses of each demand should be revisited, and the communication of said action status should not conflate progress with completion, nor stagnation with progress. Annual or biannual assessment and updates should be made to each uncompleted demand with links to relevant data and more information. In conclusion, in November of 2020, I told you all about the letter from UMD's president, Dr. Pines, titled Partnering to End Anti-Black Racism. In this letter, Dr. Pines shared, "Our willingness to advocate for and create change is a testament to our shared commitment and inclusive excellence. While this group, the group working on the Black student demands, is dedicated to addressing anti-Black racism, we also remain focused on advocating for social justice for any member of our Terrapin family who faces inequities and bias. I can think of no greater purpose. That is the work that makes us Terrapin strong." To President Pines, who may perhaps one day read this dissertation, or maybe someone on his team will. I agree. There is no greater purpose than advocating for justice for all, while acknowledging that Black folks were and are experiencing higher levels of racism and violence on campus compared to non-Black groups, and seeking to end that anti-Black racism and violence. I hope that the University of Maryland's willingness to advocate for and create change to end Black student experiences with anti-Black racism remains a testament to our shared commitment to inclusive excellence. Though I would have loved to see that happen in my 5 years at UMD from 2020 to 2025, I am unfortunately one of many Black UMD students who will graduate and become an alumna, still hoping for a change that has yet to come. However, I hold on to the hope I once felt that UMD will stand by its commitments to Black students. I encourage whatever student, staff, faculty, or community member reading this dissertation or listening to it now to please use this study and the perspective of these brilliant Black students to hold your institution accountable and to advocate for campuses that value, protect, and support Black students, Black faculty, Black staff, and Black people. With that, I would love to know what questions you have.
Thank you, Victoria.